Welcome everyone to today's World Court of Human Rights Coalition meeting. We will be welcoming Wanjeri Nderu as our expert speaker, and I will introduce her shortly after a brief coalition update. For the sake of time, for anyone who would like to, please enter your contact information or identify yourselves in the group chat, as well as any organization you might be affiliated with. So to start, I'll just give a really brief coalition update. I'm very excited to say that we do have a government outreach coordinator for Africa who is on the Zoom today, Rosalind Minuve, and a government outreach coordinator for the Americas, Vail Gaitan, and also on the call with us today, our public outreach coordinator, Wanjeri Nderu. And at an upcoming meeting, I don't know if that will be at the end of June or maybe the end of July, but we'll have a meeting where they will introduce themselves, how they got involved with the World Court of Human Rights Coalition, and they'll report on their initial activities. They'll be, of course, helping us to increase visibility of the future court and of the coalition, both in the government and public sectors. Of course, we want to also find individuals who would be interested in advancing the coalition and the court in other sectors of society. Quick update regarding the Economic and Social Council of the NGO branch and our request for consultative status for our foundation, which is what this the World Citizenship Foundation, which is what this coalition is belongs to, you might say. And we got an email about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Basically, I'm sure they sent it out to a lot of organizations that they said they're overwhelmed with a backlog of applications. So instead of us hearing back from them in June, so in about 2 or 3 weeks, we probably won't hear from them till sometime in 2025, unfortunately. But anyway, that's I wasn't surprised about that. But anyway, hopefully we'll have some more positive news in the next few months if they're able to get through that backlog of applications. Well, okay, so now we'll move into the heart of the meeting, and I'd like to introduce Wanjeri Nderu. Nderu is a communications consultant and an award-winning human rights defender from Kenya, who specializes in the linkages between corruption and other social justice and human rights violations, with a focus on the eradication of sexual violence in all its forms. Nderu is president of the International Society for Human Rights, Germany, the Kenyan chapter, and is also the current vice president of ISHR in charge of East Africa. In addition to dealing with sexual violence perpetrators, Nderu strongly advocates on behalf of the Kenyan Constitution, serving as the head of the secretariat of the Linda Katiba Initiative, which she'll hopefully tell us a little bit more about, and using her extensive communication experience for advocacy. So I do want to thank Wanjeri Nderu, our public outreach coordinator, for reaching out to Wanjeri Nderu and introducing us to share her human rights advocacy with us. And I sincerely appreciate Wanjeri speaking with us today. So Wanjeri, those are my comments. So we'd love to hear from you now for the rest of the meeting. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, David. Thank you. Great to speak to you again. And Wanyaga for ambushing me, but she's forgiven. It's all for a good cause. Right. So I'm based out of Nairobi, Kenya, and I've been doing this for over 10 years now, but I have not always been like a frontline human rights advocate. And for purposes of clarity at the beginning, I am not a lawyer in any way or form. A lot of people assume I am. I have a media background. That is what my studies were. But my knowledge of the law is in connection to the work that I do. So out of interest, I have had to teach myself, things on our constitution, things about Kenyan law, international law, and things like that that affect or impact my work in any way or form. So as I said, I've not always been a human rights defender on the front line. I used to work in the financial industry for quite a number of years. And at one point over 10 years ago, I came across 2 little brothers who had been sexually abused by a member of parliament from one of our constituencies here in Kenya. And the member of parliament, who is now deceased, he passed away, I think, in 2022, was never brought to justice. And when I found these little boys, they had what we call a medical condition called a prolapse because of the sexual abuse. So they could not even sit. They were from a very poor background. They could not report this man. He's a, in Kenya, when you're an MP or somebody that big, and they like to prey on people who do not have money in any way or form, there's no way they can be able to attain justice. So the only thing I could do at the time was take them to hospital, get them, repaired, and try to restore their lives as much as I could. And then I embarked on doing research, because that was the first time I had come across children that young, males, who had been sexually abused. So I found out that it is something that is very common in Kenya. And it is just that we tend to amplify more on girls being sexually abused than boys. And when I found this out, I just went to my boss and told him I just want to take a year break, because the kind of work I would do would allow me to take those kind of breaks and even change companies if I wanted. They always are poaching people who are into marketing and financial solutions. So he told me, you take your year. And since I took that year, I've never been able to go back to work, because I found so many violations. I had to go after so many suspects to make sure whichever case I handled, we at least get some form of justice in terms of these people getting jailed. My Kenyan counterparts may remember a case where last year somebody was jailed for 100 years for raping boys. And I've had that case for close to 8 years. So it's not always easy because our justice wheels are very, very slow. There's a lot of corruption. A lot of these people who do these crimes are very well connected, and they have a lot of money too. So they get the best lawyers, then they make sure that they corrupt the court systems. So a lot of them do get away, but we do have several success cases that I can say have happened due to some of the things that I do. Now, I do not have an organization, and I'm not funded in any way or form, which comes as a surprise to many, considering a lot of the things that I do. But what I did is that I realized the power of social media very, very early on. And I leveraged on the fact that it can be able to reach so many people very quickly, very cheaply. And also, duty bearers in Kenya are terrified of that space. In fact, they spend a lot of money whitewashing themselves online. Kenyans are one of the most active countries in Africa online, if not the most. We are, in fact, other countries in Africa tend to tease us that we are bullies, because when we go online, we can be something else. So I realized that online space is very, very powerful. And since I did not have any funding, I opened up a Facebook page, which was closed by the former president, actually, in early 2022. He liaised with Google, and it was shut down. It was called Buyer Beware, and it had over 300,000 members, and we had 2 co-administrators. And we used to tackle a lot of corruption cases there. And if we got cases of children, for instance, who had been sexually abused, and we would put the cases out there, including the perpetrators, and you would find action happening, because a lot of these senior people had people within the group watching what we're doing. So we took on governors, we took on the president himself, we took on so many of these corruption cases that tend to, be very common here in Kenya. And well, unfortunately, it was shut down, but my personal page is still there on X, now X, and it has about 65,000 members. So I still use that a lot. And I have a personal page on Facebook. So what happens in the social media space in Kenya, being that the people who are in power know how powerful that space is, and they have people who work for them specifically managing either their social media sites and everything. When we have cases, or when we have issues, like now, if I want the current president of Kenya, Honorable Ruto, to know something is happening that needs attention, and I tag him on his handle, whether he's the one who's handling it that day himself, or his handler is going to know something is happening, and it will be brought to his attention. So that is how we have been able, as individual human rights defenders, to be able to come into contact or to get solutions for some of the cases that we deal with. So yeah, that is, yeah, maybe they're up to date, but who is Linda Katiba? Linda Katiba, about 2 years back, no, 4 years back in 2020, 2021, the government attempted to bring something called the Building Bridges Initiative, which was an attempt to change our laws without us going through a referendum. And the laws that were being changed were definitely just going to favor the ruling class in terms of the either collaborations, how they can be able to form their coalitions, how they can be able to, share power. It had nothing to do with the goodwill. It was a document that really had zero goodwill for the Kenyan people, but only benefited the senior politicians. And this was especially because we have term limits in Kenya. After 2 terms or 5 years, you cannot be able to run again for president. So when you have a document like that being brought up at the tail end of the former president's term, for him to have a sort of a continuation, that was one of the things that were risky about the document, amongst other things. So we came together, a group of us, and we called ourselves Linda Katiba. Linda Katiba means protect the constitution. Linda is protect in Swahili, and Katiba is constitution. So we went to court, as among other people and other partners, NGOs, lawyers, and we stopped the implementation of that document. So that was the birth of Linda Katiba. It's a very, very small group of people, and we managed to do what we did because of collaborations and partnerships with other people. But Linda Katiba is credited for the stopping of that document. Now, also, a lot of people assumed we were very, very many people behind this movement, but we were very few. We were actually less than 10 people, but the way we used our social media, the way we leveraged on the communications aspect of the whole campaign made it look like the entire country was against this document. So that really played a big role in the use of communications as a form of, advocacy. So yeah, is there anything I've left out from the intro? I think that was that.
Maybe a little bit more about how you got involved with the International Society for Human Rights Germany. I think there's a link between that and your work, both.
Okay, so the International, the International Society of Human Rights are based in Germany, out of Bonn, and they also have offices, I think, in Frankfurt here. And just the way Wanyaga, is it Wanyaga or Wanyaka? Wanyaka just contacted me out of the blue. Yeah, and said, Wanjeri, hi, I am so-and-so from ABCD. We want to do this meeting and would like to know if you're interested, is how they approached me. They just saw my work. Apparently, they'd been investigating me, as I was told, for a while to see, because they needed, the Kenyan president at the time was retiring and they needed a replacement. So they did their due diligence and they appointed me president about 2 years ago. And last year, I became vice president, East Africa. So yeah, that's how I became the president of ISHR. But ISHR is mostly volunteer-led organization. So we do not have, it's not like a funding society of some sort. A lot of people tend to think Wanjeri is a president of ISHR, so she must have access to all this money and all that. We don't work like that. We are mainly just volunteer-based. And each president in their different countries do their own thing, and if possible, fundraise when they can, where they can. Though we have a challenge in Kenya, and not just Kenya, Africa generally, we do not have a way of feeling the need to give to do advocacy work or to do human rights work. We will give for funerals, we will give for weddings and things like that. But when you tell people we need to fundraise to take children to hospital who need this, we don't have that culture. But I see that a lot in the West. The West has it. I've seen it. I saw it also in Europe. Also, there's a lot of that, where a lot of the funding that comes to Africa is actually from people's pockets, in other parts of the world. If you go to the UK, for instance, they have all these charity shops. And those charity shops, people take this clothes there, they sell them secondhand, and that money comes like amnesty or things like that. And the money comes here as aid to Africa. But it is actually individuals in those places that make that money be possible to come about. But in Kenya, we don't have that. So I'm trying to see if we can create a culture like that here, where we take personal responsibility for our issues. And that way, perhaps we will now less rely on these donors that have to give us money, and their money comes with conditions. So like just the other day, I was having a conversation with somebody who had asked for funding support, brilliant proposal. But because they did not have a clause that touches on a subject she didn't want to deal with, they did not, because of her Christian values. And she did not want to work, for instance, with the LGBTQ community or advance that agenda. And she was denied the funding. So if the people within the Christian community would believe in her work, she would not need to write these proposals. You see, so that is the kind of culture, we call it Ubuntu, the Utu culture, the we are one culture, you know, that thing of just building one another up. We hardly have it here in Kenya. So I'm hoping through the ISHR office here, we can be able to build something like that. Yeah.
And how does the ISHR work either complement or contrast to the other work you're doing, maybe as an individual human rights defender for the work either with regard to the Kenyan Constitution or other social justice issues in Kenya and then also in East Africa?
Yes, so what happens is we work mostly in partnership, in collaboration of some sort. Like now, if I have things I am doing here, we have newsletters that we put out. And if I have, like now, for instance, we have the flooding crisis, and I'm trying to get blankets and mattresses and things like that. And if I would package that story and it's put in the newsletter, the ISHR newsletter is well read within Germany. And that is how somebody within Germany is going to say, I want to buy 5 mattresses. I want to, you know, things like that. So the individual supports ISHR to support causes like those ones by just putting our stories in the monthly newsletters, and then somebody decides which cause that they're going to go with. So they're fairly new in terms of operations here in Kenya and Africa generally, in terms of the solidity of it. But in Europe, it works perfectly. They are huge with the refugee crisis also in Iraq and places like that. They're very on the ground with the other sector presidents in other parts of the world. So we are still trying to build something like that here within Kenya and Africa in general. Yeah.
I see.
Okay.
And then because you've elucidated that most of your work seems to be on a volunteer basis, and the fact that you're not a lawyer, when you've taken cases or raised awareness about cases that need to go to court, do you engage local like pro bono legal services, or how do you get sort of the law contingent involved to
Okay.
process through?
So what happens is that I have been able, fortunately, to create a network countrywide of human rights defenders, including lawyers. So I don't pay them any money. It's all on a voluntary system. And for instance, Kenya has 47 counties, right? And in each of those 47 counties, I have point people on the ground who can act on cases I receive from those jurisdictions. I can't be everywhere all the time. Before I'd find myself moving around a lot, but now, because of this, I call them cells. So they're little Wanjeri Nderu cells, if I can put it that way. I know somebody on speed dial I would want to call in Mombasa, in Kisumu, anywhere there's a case. And I have lawyers. Now, fortunately for me, my sister is a lawyer. So, and my husband also is a lawyer also. So I take advantage, let me just be honest, of the relationships, and I get them to help me with a lot of the pro bono cases that I have, and also their friends support me in that way. And I find that much more powerful than me sitting down to do proposals to hire lawyers, because these lawyers are giving back also. So I've never needed to pay a lawyer for any of the cases I've taken to court. Yeah, it's all pro bono, and the volunteer system works perfectly. And when we need funds, when we get to a space where there's necessity for funds, it's not usually for legal services. It's for medical, mostly medical or relocation of, like now, for instance, two months ago, I had a child, 4-year-old girl who had been raped and had been held in the hospital because she could not pay bills. She had gone for surgery, and after she was well, they held her in the hospital for about a month. And every day she's there, that's money being counted as an admitted person. And she accumulated so much money, and the hospital was not letting them go. And I just went on my social media and I asked, why is a hospital, first of all, holding a 4-year-old child this is not a normal disease. This was a sexual abuse case. And in our laws, actually, any child above, below the age of 5, they should be treated for free if it is a sexual abuse case. But in the Sexual Offences Act, I think. But that doesn't happen normally. We have to pay for those services. And I put it on my social media, and within hours, people had raised the money for this child. But what I did is we needed to relocate this child from where this child was, because the perpetrator and the family are usually people who are within their community. So I used my connections and social media pressure to get the hospital to release the child, and we did not pay the hospital any money. This money went into, we sent the money to the parents of the child. She had to be changed schools, they had to change homes, moving and all that. And when the rest of the money, we just sent her for their own use, because the money was being collected for this child anyway. So those are some of the things maybe we'll raise money for. But when it comes to legal services, I don't need to raise money. I have that covered. Yeah.
That's great. Well, so
Yeah.
we're a relatively new coalition, and one of the reasons we love to have expert guest speakers is to come and explain the procedural aspects of how you built your network, because it's not just in Kenya, it's also East Africa.
Yeah.
What did you learn along the way? How did you start this? I mean, obviously you had some maybe kind of high profile, at least in your social media, cases that you could initially raise awareness. So how did you get the ball rolling? How did the procedures go? Like sort of step by step, how we could take that information and learn from it.
Okay. So I've been able to do everything I do because of, as I said, collaborations and partnerships. So I have a lot of goodwill within the Kenyan civil society community. And if I have something that I am unable to deal with as an individual, I know that, for instance, I can walk into an organization and tell them we have this issue that is happening. I am an individual who is not funded. You are funded to do this kind of work. You take it up. But most of the time, I'm the first responder. Most of the time, I'm the one receiving the issues, receiving the cases. I'm the one with the community on the ground. And like last week we held a huge protest against the demolitions that are currently happening within Nairobi, and the improper housing that is happening with Chinese, especially with the Chinese developers. So what they've done is that they have compromised our planning system within Nairobi County government, right? And there's obvious collusion between the leadership of the county government and the Chinese developers. And they're building day and night in places that they should not even be putting up those flats. And we are talking 200 units, 300 units in very small enclosures that are not even supposed to hold that many people. And the amenities are still the same, some parts of Nairobi up to the last in the 1970s. So some of the flooding we are seeing is because of this unplanned building. So Nairobi is literally now becoming a concrete jungle because of illegal building. On top of that, we have so many people who have encroached on what we call riparian land, right? And riparian land is the space that you should leave before, between you and the source of waterway. So like a river, for instance. And maybe they say things like 30 meters away, you shouldn't build anything on that. But in Nairobi, that is not happening. People are building right on top of the river. And this is mainly common in informal settlements. And of course, because we have a housing issue and these are poor people, they'll build wherever they're going to find free space. But we also have the same issue happening in high-end areas. This flooding actually equalized everybody. I'm not saying it was exciting for me as a human rights defender to see how the equality of the suffering was across board, because a lot of the time people tend to think if a problem is not affecting me, it's not my problem. But this time round, even the very rich, high-end people who are living in two-story buildings were waking up and looking out the window and they can't see their cars because their cars are underwater or their houses are underwater. There's a friend who came out of her bed and her bedroom is in an upstairs floor and she just jumped inside a pool of water. So everybody was affected. But if you look at one of the reasons why we are having this problem is because of people building illegally and building everywhere and blocking waterways. But what was the response from the authorities, from government? They decided the solution was to go and demolish houses or structures that were along the river sides, the river banks. But they didn't demolish for the rich and the middle class. They were only demolishing, and the demolishings are not in the news now as much as they were before we did the protest and after, but they're doing it still. It's continuing every single day, and they're only targeting poor neighborhoods. So those are some of the injustices you find. You find that the high-end people who have done the same exact thing that the poor people have done are not getting the consequences of their actions in terms of legal action, in terms of the houses being demolished. But we have people dying within informal settlements because they were asleep and excavators just turned up and started demolishing homes. So we had a few deaths related to that the other day. And they're not even getting enough notice. They're not being told, you know what, we are giving you 2 weeks to move. They're waking up and finding bulldozers outside their doors. So those are some of the really annoying things that made us go to the street last week. And that protest was so impactful that one of our members had requested for the Nairobi County government to give us some legal documents under the Freedom of Information Act, and also to release, as a citizen, if I want some government information released, I can be able to write and it is released, because it's not supposed to be a secret anyway. But because they know the corruption behind it, they refused to release the information. And this information was requested for in January. But after our protest, the following day, the ombudsman wrote to the county government governor, Sakaja, and told him, you have to release these documents. So we did get some impact. We did get people angry. We were about 1,000 people on the street that day from all walks of life. So we had people from those very high-end areas who are affected by the Chinese, because they're not sleeping. The Chinese are building 24/7 using floodlights, right? So they're not even adhering to the working hours that you're supposed to be adhering to when you're building. And we also had people from the other ends of the spectrum who come from informal settlements who are suffering from the demolitions. And those individuals came together, and we also had organizations say, we're going to give you guys some t-shirts. So we had Kenya Human Rights Commission print for us t-shirts, and we had other people buying water, so we came together like that, and we were able to pull off this very successful protest. So how was I able to come up with these kind of networks? Earlier on when I started, I didn't have them, right? But with time, your work speaks for itself. And when you and people who are aligned with your way of thinking, or are seeing that what you're doing is in line with their thought process, they will want to partner. So a lot of the times, in fact, I have never had to approach anybody and say, oh, you know what, can we be partners? It's mostly the other way around, because they see that an injustice has happened. I take action on the injustice, and they feel compelled to do something about it. And they say, Wanjeri, we have the same issues happening in our community. All right. And I tell them, you know what, then you be your point person in your community. We have to take charge of some of these things ourselves. So I've been able to now create that network of human rights defenders, but also of organizations that are like-minded and are aligned to some of the things that I do. The organizations come in very handy, like when we need to go to court, for instance, and we need a very big, impactful case that impacts maybe a governance issue. They're going to do it their expert way, because I'm not a lawyer. I can't write legal arguments, right? But they'll have their lawyers do it and things like that. These same organizations we get arrested all the time. I've been arrested 13 times myself, and they're going to sit down and go like, Wanjeri has been arrested, and they're going to send lawyers to get me out from the police station or to cover me in court and things like that. So those partnerships have been very, very powerful. And people I know tend to think that money, yes, money is important, but I think human resource, the humanity and the human resource is much more important. And the gifts that people have are much more important in creating something beautiful, more than just having money that you can pay people to do things. Like all the protests I have organized and I have brought to Nairobi, and we have brought Nairobi to a standstill. I've never had to pay anybody from my pocket to come to the street. You see, people assume that when you come to the street, we are being paid to do what we are doing. But I've never had to do that. It's people see, then they align and get angry along with me. And I say, let's go to the street and protest and say, let's stop these thieves. There's a protest I organized called Stop These Thieves that I had to even leave the country. I had to come to the US after that protest for a while. It's one of the times that I was told your life is in danger and you have to leave. And I was in Seattle for 4 months with my family because I was targeted, me, my husband, and my children, because of organizing that protest. And Nairobians came out willingly. And we, it was amazing. It was a beautiful sight. But it was one of the biggest protests held in Nairobi. And I didn't have to use any financial resource. I just needed to speak to people, tell them in a language that they understand. You see, in Kenya, the word corruption is yes, it is a word we hear every day, but in our local languages, we don't have a word that really replaces that word corruption. So the best thing to do is to speak to people in a language they understand. They will understand who a thief is, for instance. Who is a thief? We know who a thief is. Corruption is theft. It may be several systems being put together to accomplish this thuggery, but at the end of the day, it is theft. So when you tell people this one is a corrupt person, they don't get it. Tell them this is a thief, they get it. And you use a language as simple, when you simplify the corruption language for the common person, it becomes very powerful. And that is just some of the tactics that I use. So there's usually this joke among our politicians that Kenyans don't like to read and things like that. But well, I've had it also in other countries where you're told if you want to hide something, hide it in a book. But just because Kenyans don't like to read does not mean they do not or are not deserving of information. So I have access, for instance, to people within offices who tell me, Wanjeri, we have a document that shows certain amount of money was stolen by a certain individual. And this document is not public. And when I receive that document, I'll just simplify it and splash it online. Or I make sure I hand it over to a journalist, it becomes a headline piece. So we also work very well with the media. The media have been my friends. So every time I have something that I need to put out there, I make sure that the media are the first people to partner with, so that we first put the information out there and they come and cover, like the amount of coverage I get for the work that I do. There are people who even used to assume that I work within a media house, and I don't. It's just creating partnerships with individuals in media and telling them we need to make noise about something, and they take it on from there. And we also have conversations with decision makers within media houses, where we can say, you guys have these panels of experts that you're always calling to your studios. How about you take on this topic? How about let's discuss child rape? How about, we suggest to them the topics that they're going to discuss, and they bring a panel together and they call us to studio and we discuss it. So those are some of the ways that I've been able to create this huge network that is just run in a little corner bedroom in Nairobi. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate the point you're making about how the actions that you're taking is what brings in, whether it's the media, whether it's individuals who are suffering in their particular city or community who want to reach out to you rather than you having to reach out to them. You're in a sense showing what can be done, and so more people will come, and that's how you've built that network. And especially, I guess, with your communications expertise, that's really an advantage for you. I do have a lot of other questions, but just are there any, before we leave this sort of a topic, are there other tactics or strategies that you feel in building a network that we should be aware of, other procedures, tactics, strategies?
Part of my work as a communication expert is that I also do a lot of communication strategies for people who, like, for instance, if I take your organization as an example, and you guys want to onboard several more people to this idea of a World Court of Human Rights, you sit down first and come up with a communication strategy. Communications is the backbone of everything you want to do. So if you have your communication strategy right, everything else just flows from there, because the communication strategy guides you on how you are communicating, not to your audience and to your target market. It will also allow you to come up with a list of who is it do we want on board. An organization is different from an individual. In my case, I will have people come to me and go like, we want to support your work. Instead, and because I don't have an organization, I cannot be able to write a proposal to say, kindly fund my work. And the reason I don't have an organization is that in Kenya, we are usually, like, they have what we call the National Intelligence Service. And when you want to register an organization, the National Intelligence Service has to, quote unquote, approve. And the times that I tried, I was told, Wanjeri, don't even bother trying. If you're already doing all this damage with no money, what will happen when you get a proposal approved in an organization and then you do a proposal? Because organizations, without an organization, you don't get funding. They don't fund individuals. They want to fund an entity. So I can't get registered here in Kenya for that purpose. I intend to try again this year with the new government to see if it's going to work. I don't know. But so far, I've not seen them attacking any human rights per se, like in the former regime. And the current president did promise us and said that he's not going to touch on human rights defenders cells. So far, we have had 2 cases of killings, but they've happened in counties and in cases that are not related to the national government. So I can give that to him as a plus. So I'll try. But you as an organization, on the other hand, needs to do that communication strategy. It's going to guide you on who are we meeting, how are we putting out this information. And then you must have a list of who your target audience is. And now you'll have to actively look for them and ask them, this is who we are. We'd like to partner. This is some of our work, but because you are doing this on an organizational level, you will need partners that are almost aligned to you organizationally in terms of scope, in terms of people, in terms of how big they are. In Kenya, for instance, we have organizations that work around these issues. Like now we have the ICJ, the Commission of Jurists, or something. There are some organizations, like if I sit down and come up with a list within Kenya, you can be able to write to and say, this is who we are. And they work around the issues that you want to touch on. They work around issues of human rights. They work around the issues of international law, international humanitarian law, and things like that. And they will be able to tell you whether they can partner or not. So when you want to do something in Nairobi, you have an organization that's going to make sure, for instance, you have accommodation, you have meeting rooms and things like that. So you might want to do that first. So those are some of the things that I do professionally, like, align people together. And yes, there are people who laugh and call me fixer, so I don't know. But those are some of the things that you as an organization, I think, needs to do. Yeah, it's a very different approach from how I would do it as an individual. Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to support you guys. Come up with a list of who you might want to. I'll get in touch with your Kenyan counterpart as an aside, and maybe I'll take some time next week. Excellent. And come up with a list of people that maybe she can help connect you guys to see if you can create partnerships. These partnerships are important, and they can work if you want to create presence here in Kenya, and if you want to buy in, because of course you will need Kenya to be like a member state when this finally comes to, So who do you want within the Kenyan space to start lobbying and to make sure when you get to that point, it's an instant hit. Wow. I'm glad to have you on our side, Wanjeri. Thank you so much. Well, so I know you as a human rights defender, you've even mentioned it briefly earlier in the Zoom today. How do you see, for example, the establishment of a World Court of Human Rights to be supportive of human rights defenders? Where do you see, how do you see that space might be useful for you? I think it's brilliant. I was reading your website after your colleague contacted me, and I'm like, where have you guys been? And why is this not yet set up already? Because what we find is, as human rights defenders, especially as individuals, we come across very gross violations that affect entire communities, not just individual children or male or female, communities. And those people who do this kind of things, I'll give you a very good example. There's some parts of Kenya that are always having some form of quote unquote tribal clashes. But these tribal clashes that kill people every single year are sponsored by politicians who are well known. So you'll hear the interior minister go like, oh, we are going to crack down on these bandits. These are not bandits. These are organized personal gangs that belong to people. They're militia, really. And they're paid and supported by politicians. And these politicians are well known. If a politician like that would know that a court like this exists, where people of that community can take him, it would be a deterrent. It would work a court like that would work to really decrease the number of violations, especially that affect communities that we have here. We have a brilliant lady, and maybe I can give you a connection to her. You have a conversation with her. She went to court because where she comes from in the coastal region, there's a company there that left, I think, lead and metals and stuff, and people are dying. There's cancer, there's birth defects, there's all sorts of things. And they were able to prove that this company is the one that was responsible. And she's currently in a Kenyan court, and that case has been ongoing in Kenya forever. Her advocacy around this issue has been on. She's actually internationally recognized specifically because of standing up for that community. She's had to flee this country because of death threats and things like that. And if a court like this was already information, she would be able to present her case there for consideration, because our courts, though there's been a huge improvement in our courts of late in terms of supporting people-led cases. You know, when we are seeing violations of the Constitution and we go to court, the courts are, you know, standing with us. Before, in the past, because they would fear the powers that be, they would give shoddy judgments and just decide we are not touching this. But now we are seeing them agreeing with the people and saying, yes, this is actually a violation of the Constitution, and writing judgments to that effect. And this is forcing the government to go back and try to redraw and play draft and chess with their document and present it again. And we still take it back to court and it is thrown out. So a lot of the bills that, for instance, are being put out there, if they're not constitutionally valid, we are able to go to court and say, this is not going to work. It's against our Constitution. And the courts are agreeing with us. But there are some cases where you will find, if I take, for instance, look at, we had the Panama Papers and the Pandora Papers. Kenya featured prominently. Our former president was top 6 of the list of people who have hidden money in tax havens. And we are talking billions of dollars. And you wonder, where did that money come from? And where does it have to be hidden? You know, and him and his family were named. In fact, I was just browsing in Kenya, the news the media just touched on it, like, you know, just a little icing, because they didn't want it to be something big. He's the president. I mean, you do not want, so they just touched on it a little, but it was covered a lot internationally, right? And I remember a friend of mine who lives in Australia, somewhere in the backwoods of Australia, sending me a little news clip that was in the local TV station in the areas, mentioning that Kenya's president is among the people who are hiding money abroad. If a case like that, if a court like this existed, what would stop me as Wanjeri or Kenyans from coming to court and saying, we want our former president to return the loot that he stole? Because, to be very honest, that is Kenyan money, right? And the investigations prove that a lot of this money that is out there, and this investigation took like 3 years from several different people got involved in this investigation internationally, and they were able to prove that these are illicit funds. These are funds that are at times not necessarily acquired in a legal way. What would stop me from coming to a court like that to do that? Do you see? So this is way overdue, way overdue. And I hope it was, you know, when you said, was it yesterday or when you were briefing about that in the next 5 or 10 years, I'm thinking, no, this should have been set up like yesterday, because we need this as human rights defenders. And also, it doesn't take away from the existing courts. It doesn't take away from the ICC. It doesn't take away from what the ICJ does or the European Court of Human Rights does. It doesn't take away, it actually complements. In fact, I think this is it's more holistic, in that if you look at the other courts, they're very particular on who they will take there. You know, they'll take a president, but this one, I can be able to bring that very rich politician who is killing our people, and I can be able to present a case and it's going to be valid. So it's a brilliant idea. And I wish you well. I really do.
Yeah. Thank you, Wanjeri. Well, so this is sort of a 2-part question. And then after this, I'd love to open up to the floor, because we're getting a little bit short on time here, to any other questions. So the positive, I think, from what you're saying is that there are governmental leaders and parliamentarians who have, over the years, had so much impunity from any kind of rights violations, from what they allow to happen to certain vulnerable groups, but then not, say, to the rich or other things like that, or just people have been able to, like you said, hide money. So I guess, what do you think about?
Even
Right,
companies.
right.
We have a big problem in Kenya in the food production sector, where we have companies that own huge tracts of land, international companies, and they grow their avocados and they grow all this pineapples or whatever it is that they're going to grow. But the amount of human rights violations that happen on those farms, from people being mauled to death by dogs, from rape, from guards killing people, from all sorts of things are happening in there. But they really hardly are ever held to account. So it's not just individuals. We are talking also, yeah.
So I guess the question is, how do you see that this World Court of Human Rights, maybe in addition to the African Commission and Court, could be dealing with some of these impunity issues, both regionally and locally? And then the other part of the question is, what concerns do you have about such a court and maybe abuse of power, or something that you've seen elsewhere, but that you want to make sure wouldn't happen with this court?
Okay. I've not read like all of your, I've read a few of your documents in the last few days. So some of the things that I was asking myself was, how will you prevent abuse in terms of, like now in Africa and in Kenya specifically, after we had the ICC take our current president and the former president to court, after their cases ended, whichever way they ended, amidst all this controversy, how do we know that that court is also not going? Because if you look at the ICC, where most of their cases centered, it's Africa. And we have people in other countries who belong, at the ICC, but their focus is Africa. And also, the narrative here is that the ICC is used at times for settling political scores. We have seen that, for instance, happening in Kenya, where if the president is not happy with you and you're a political you're not a political ally of his and he wants you out of the way, they take you to court for corruption charges. Most of these charges are valid, but the court is used as a weapon. They weaponize the justice system against their enemies. So how are we going to protect ourselves as the World Court of Human Rights from the kind of thing where we see maybe the West, as we call it, using the court to, get rid of people that they don't like on this other side of the world, So that is a worry, that is a concern that is there. But also you'll find what prevents me, for instance, as Wanjeri, and I have a problem with your colleague here, and I bring her to that court because I have a problem with her. So the loopholes for misuse are there. So I've not yet read anywhere in your paperwork about how you are intending to make sure that happens. I know, like, for instance, the ICC investigates the cases themselves, right? So I'm sure you guys have a mechanism where you're going to figure out, before we take on a case, we need to authenticate why it's coming on. But if we look at how the ICC case happened in Kenya, before they were even brought to court, there was a lot of media and propaganda and a lot of, so whether you investigate and find it worthy or not, how do you protect the process such that even by the time the case is starting, we know this person validly belongs in that court? So those are just the only concerns that I have.
Excellent. Okay, great. Well, so now, since we only have about 7 or 8 minutes left before the hour, I'd love to see if others, since I've been asking so many questions, I would love to see if others have questions. Does anyone have anything you'd like to ask Wanjeri? Go ahead, Dre.
Not so much as a question, but really a comment of what really resonated, talking about communication strategy being embedded into the work. I have seen, I think, across the board in a lot of NGO work and coalitions, that communications is done post strategy. And it's really
Agree.
not integrated. And so NGO work and all kinds of like peace work, anti-corruption, you name it, it's all focused on, okay, theory of change and strategy and plan, but then forgetting that communication strategy. And that I think is a real missed opportunity. And I
It is.
also love what you said, like I got goosebumps about turning like high level stuff into more common language and able to translate that to a lot of people. And I think that is so important. I think so many, because I'm also not a lawyer, just just a full disclosure. But so many work at high level and have high level documents, and it's not translated down to the every person. And that's again links back to what you said about communication strategy being embedded in. And if we have that from the beginning, I
Yeah.
think we could reach not just more people, but young people.
Yeah.
And that's really going to be that change in the amount of people we can get behind this, is how
True.
do we speak to young people and using more common language and then directing it towards their lives of
Yeah.
why does this matter to them. So I just wanted to say thank you. This was just so inspiring, important, but also, like I said, I got so many goosebump points in your speech of like, yes, yes, yes. So thank you for your time and for being here.
You're welcome. Just to reinforce what you're saying, I have seen a slight change within the Kenyan civil society, I think. And I'm not saying I have much to do with it. I have played a role in it, maybe a very small one. But we have had problems where you're doing communications at the tail end instead of at the beginning. So if you have a project and you're thinking about what you'll communicate, how you'll communicate the end product, at the end of it, it never works. It never works. And then we're also very big on publications that we now, then we keep the publications to ourselves. We never simplify them for the public. All right. But also what communication does is that it enables, when you map the people that you want to work with. Like now, for instance, sorry, you've talked about the youth, the young people. There's a way we can be able to talk to them that they will be able to buy an idea like this without it looking like it is something that is so grand and beyond them. And I'll give you a perfect example of the ICC case in Kenya. We had many people in Kenya knew the ICC court existed when our president and the current president, our former and the current, were being taken there. We didn't know the ICC existed. So what they did, because they knew the Kenyan people were ignorant of the roles of this court, and they were ignorant of the fact that this court is actually trying to get some form of justice for the number of Kenyans perhaps who died or things like that. What happened is that they used that opportunity to go to the ICC to actually create even more of a hold amongst their supporters. So they made it look like it's political witch hunt. The international community doesn't want them to rule and things like that. But if the people knew what this court was way beforehand, we would have been able to understand why they've been taken there in the first place. But them going there even made them actually even more popular and even more. So they created a wave of sympathy for themselves around them being presented at the ICC. So with you people, you still have time to come up with something that will make sure if you go to a place like where we're having those clashes in Kenya, and they know that a court like this exists, creating those cells even amongst themselves, just doing some civic education in a language that they understand. And they know that, what, if you want to, this politician, is the one who's funding for you people to get killed or for you people to be displaced from your homes. When that community is empowered with information like that, they will organize themselves. Okay. And they're going to be able to go and take this politician or the leader who's doing this to them to court. So communications is key, and it will help map who do you want to target, because your target is not only for the people you partner with. it is the buying also from the public, so yeah. For me, communications is key. It's everything. It's without it, even we're told in a marriage, if you're not communicating in a marriage, just in any relationship, communications has to be there, right? So we need to see how we can be able to create something that concrete, that by the time you're coming to Kenya to lobby for us to be signatories, you already have partners here. You already have people like within the youth movement. We have a robust youth movement here that understand what it is that you're presenting. So when we are lobbying and you have people who are going to do the advocacy for you, it will look like the public is also with you. So it's not a decision that is just being made at the high level on behalf of the public. The public is also with you when they're doing this. And this can be replicated or, everywhere else that you're targeting in the world. Yeah.
That makes sense. So much for our strategy. Yeah, definitely. Well, we were going to call upon you, Wanjeri, in the future for your communications expertise. I guess I'll see does anyone else have any final quick questions or comments for Wanjeri? We still have about another minute or two.
No, it's okay. Take your time. Don't be rushed.
And I can say, while we're waiting to see if anyone else has another question, that we will have our next meeting on June 26th, which is also the last Wednesday of the month at 11 a.m. Rosalind, I'll get to you in just a second. So let me just, or maybe Rosalind, you were going to mention this, but our guest for that meeting is Betty Wambua, the senior program attorney at the International Justice Mission in Kenya. I'm not sure if you know her, Wanjeri, but it would be
Yeah.
You do? Okay, good. Well,
yeah, not personally, but yeah.
Okay, good. Rosalind, did you want to mention something?
Yes, first I wanted to thank Wanjeri. Now I know her from Facebook, from Be Aware. It is great to meet here, and I agree with whatever she's saying. And then also David and the team, what has come to my mind as she was discussing, what are we doing? Definitely,
Okay,
like
sorry,
for
I can't
myself,
hear you.
I'm volunteering for a few hours. But also, the rest of the team, the people that are volunteering, we are volunteering for a few hours. But then again, I think we should come with apart from this monthly meeting, we should come up with a work plan, give ourselves target, so that even during this monthly meeting, we are reporting on the progress. For example, I'm supposed to do government outreach manager in Africa. I'll try to get my friends in South Africa and some friends from Ghana and maybe Togo, and then Uganda and Arusha. But then again, we should be accountable such that apart from this monthly meeting whereby we have guest speakers, even as an organization, we have a work plan. There's something that is keeping us on toes. Wanjeri, thank you so much for the information. It has really touched me, especially now that I'm working with the government and we are the ones who are doing the demolition. It's not fair, but then again, it's but then again, it's work, and I can say from the demolition, it's like a platform for bribery, and the outcry has been out there. So I think once this court exists, I think there will be fairness to every human being on earth. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosalind. Wanjeri, any final comments or words of wisdom that you'd like to share before we leave for the day?
Well, it was a pleasure to be here. I do hope that you guys are successful in whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. I think it's amazing. I think it's way overdue, especially for me being on the other side. I would be probably the first client in that court. So let's, I think, maybe work on creating those partnerships first, even as you're doing all the paperwork behind the scenes. And giving time to come up with everything, to package it. As you're packaging it, also complement it by making sure that once everything is complete, you have your boots on the ground. And those boots on the ground are not gonna come at the end. They will have to come now as you're preparing to get to the ground. So yeah, so unless anybody has any other question, I am happy to help. I'll help you map. It's actually very easy, but I'll work with your colleague here in Kenya to help you map who I think you can work with. I'm happy for you to use my name and say I referred you and said that you could be a good partner. I'll also reach out to them and tell them about you and things like that, because I hadn't heard about you until Wanyeka got in touch with me. So this is really good. I'm very excited. Every time something like this happens, some of us get renewed hope for justice. We get renewed, even the energy levels that were like down kind of tend to come up when we know there are people who are working on making things, and creating a better place and a better system for us to work with, if I can put it that way. I don't like to use work, because work makes it look like I'm being paid for for doing this. But it is really amazing. It's impressive. What I was reading was I was just getting bulb moments in my head like that, So I'm very excited for you guys, and I hope it works out.
Excellent. Well, so I love the fact that we could give you some renewed hope, and that you are giving us renewed hope for the activism. I won't call it work, the activism that we're doing. I'm not paid as part of the World Court of Human Rights. I have a separate work that I get paid for, so I'm also a volunteer. But I think it's so heartfelt activism that we can feel good, at the end of the day, that we're trying to really make a change for our fellow humans all around the earth.
Yeah.
Well, Wanjeri, thank you so much for this time
A
today.
day at a time.
It's been amazing, and I look forward to working with you here as we move forward.
All right.
Excellent.
I look forward to hearing from you guys again. I'll keep checking on your progress, and I'm happy to support in any way that I can. And yes, those 70% of my time, I do volunteer work. I do earn a living by being a communications person. So I'm not only just a troublemaker. I do try to put table on the some bread on the table for my 4 children and my husband. So yeah.
Excellent. That's great.
Yeah. All right.
Wanjeri, thanks again. We will definitely be in touch.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks,
Yes,
everybody.
thank you.
Yeah. Thanks
Bye.
for today. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Take care. See you next month.
Okay.
Bye-bye.